At 4 a.m., she shouted, "You don't control me!" I quietly responded, "You're absolutely right," and walked out that same night. 6 years later, standing in a hospital corridor, a nurse asked her whether she recognized me, and she went completely still. At 4 a.m., she shouted, "You don't control me," and the sound of her voice cut through the apartment like breaking glass. I remember the red digits on the microwave clock glowing in the dark, the half-packed suitcase by the door, and the way the neighbor's dog started barking as if it sensed the fracture. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't remind her of the rent I paid, the debt I covered, or the job I declined in another city because she wasn't ready. I just said quietly, "You're absolutely right." She mistook my calm for weakness. That was her final miscalculation. I picked up my keys and walked out that same night while she was still listing my failures. Too stable, too cautious, too predictable. The hallway smelled like old carpet and someone else's dinner. The elevator mirror reflected a man I barely recognized, tired, humiliated but suddenly free. 6 years later, standing in a hospital corridor, a nurse asked her whether she recognized me, and she went completely still. I wasn't the loud one in our relationship. I was the planner, the fixer, the man who believed stability was love in its purest form. I worked double shifts, saved aggressively, and built safety nets she never noticed because they never had to be used. To her friends, I was boring but reliable. To her, I was a placeholder until something more exciting came along. She thrived on attention. Late-night parties, impulsive trips, people who mistook recklessness for confidence. I covered the consequences quietly. Overdue bills, awkward apologies, strained family dinners. When she flirted too long, drank too much, or crossed lines she swore were harmless, I convinced myself that trust meant tolerance. The truth is, I was easy to underestimate. I didn't shout. I didn't compete. I didn't perform masculinity for applause. I believed that consistency would eventually be valued. Instead, consistency became invisible. Over time, I felt myself shrinking inside the life I was funding. My ambitions adjusted to accommodate her chaos. My silence was interpreted as submission, and every time she said, "Relax, you're overthinking," I learned to doubt my instincts. By the time she yelled that I didn't control her, she had already stopped respecting me. What she didn't realize was that I had already started planning my exit. The disrespect never arrived in a single explosion. It came in small, polished moments that looked harmless from the outside. At dinners with her friends, she would squeeze my hand under the table when I started speaking, just enough pressure to make me stop. Then she'd laugh lightly and say, "He's so serious all the time," as if I were a charming flaw she tolerated. The table would smile. I would nod. When we argued, she didn't raise her voice. She tilted her head and gave me that slow, patient look, the one teachers use on children who don't understand the lesson. "You're overreacting," she'd say softly, dragging out the last word. It wasn't the sentence. It was the tone, controlled, dismissive. Her phone became a permanent extension of her hand, screen angled away. Late-night vibrations she ignored in front of me but answered in the bathroom. When I asked once, calmly, she smiled and replied, "If you trusted me, you wouldn't ask." At parties, I noticed the way she stood slightly apart from me. Not too far, just enough to signal availability. Her laugh grew louder when someone else complimented her. Each moment was small, defensible, deniable, but stitched together, they formed a quiet pattern. I was no longer her partner. I was background scenery in a life she was auditioning to upgrade. The turning point didn't happen during a fight. It happened in silence. 2 weeks before that 4 a.m. argument, I came home early from work. The apartment lights were off, but music drifted from the bedroom, low, careless laughter layered over it. I didn't burst in. I didn't shout. I stood in the hallway, hand still on the doorknob, listening to the sound of someone else being entertained in the space I paid for. When I stepped inside, it was just her, alone, phone in hand, face flushed, not guilty, but irritated that I'd interrupted something. "You're home early," she said, like I had broken a rule. I looked around the room we had built together, the framed photos, the couch I assembled. The air felt borrowed. That night, she accused me of being distant, said I'd changed. I realized she was right, but not in the way she meant. I had changed. I had stopped begging to be valued. The final argument at 4 a.m. wasn't about control. It was about accountability. When she shouted that I didn't control her, something inside me settled. No anger, no heartbreak, just clarity. You can't lose someone who stopped choosing you. When I walked out, it wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate. I didn't leave impulsively. By the time the 4 a.m. argument happened, the exit had already been engineered. I'm a financial analyst by profession. Risk assessment is what I do. Patterns, projections, worst-case scenarios. I build models around uncertainty. For months, I'd been quietly running one on my own life. The lease was in my name. So were the utilities. The joint savings account we once called our future had gradually been separated into documented contributions. I never hid money. I simply clarified ownership. Every transfer was traceable. Every bill paid had a record. I consulted a lawyer once, casually framed as hypothetical. We weren't married, but shared assets can still become complicated. I learned what mattered and what didn't. Then I acted accordingly. When I left that night, I didn't slam the door. I forwarded the final rent payment, scheduled cancellation notices, and transferred the remaining balance from our shared account back to proportional contributions. Clean, legal, undeniable. I blocked her number not out of anger, but to prevent negotiation. Silence removes leverage. Within 3 months, I accepted the promotion I'd declined years earlier. Relocation included. New city, new salary, new structure. I didn't seek revenge through destruction. I chose absence. And absence, when unexpected, is a powerful audit. 6 years passed without a single word between us. The promotion turned into a partnership. The partnership turned into equity. I built a firm that specialized in restructuring, failing private, clinics, financially stabilizing. What emotion had nearly destroyed? It was ironic in a way. I had learned to repair institutions after surviving a broken one. The hospital corridor smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion the day. I saw her again. I was there as an investor, reviewing a potential acquisition. The clinic had mismanaged funds for years. Poor oversight, emotional decisions, familiar patterns. I recognized her name on a patient chart before I recognized her face. When the nurse glanced between us and asked gently, "Do you know him?" The air shifted. She looked thinner, older in a way that wasn't about age. The confidence that once filled rooms now barely filled the hospital gown. Her eyes searched mine for something. Anger, sympathy, superiority. I gave her none. "Yes," she said finally, her voice smaller than I remembered. "I know him." I didn't correct her. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded, turned to the hospital administrator beside me, and continued discussing the acquisition terms. The clinic would survive, but not under the management that once dismissed me. Some lessons arrive loudly. Others arrive in corridors where silence speaks for you. News travels quickly in professional circles. By the end of the week, the clinic staff knew an external firm was taking partial control. Whispers moved through break rooms and behind half-closed office doors. Some were anxious, some were relieved. A few were defensive. I didn't single her out. That would have been petty and obvious. Instead, we implemented audits, performance reviews, clear metrics, accountability structures that didn't bend for charm or familiarity. The administrator who once protected, her poor decisions tried to argue that she meant well. I responded with numbers: revenue loss, patient complaints, compliance risks. Intent doesn't stabilize institutions, competence does. Colleagues began treating me differently, not because of power, but because of restraint. I hadn't weaponized history. I had professionalized it. As for her, she resigned within 3 months. Officially, it was to focus on personal health. Unofficially, the system no longer allowed shortcuts. Mutual friends reached out after hearing fragments of the story. Some apologized for how they'd underestimated me. Others stayed silent, embarrassed by their past loyalty. But the real consequence wasn't hers. It was mine. For the first time, I saw what happens when you stop begging to be valued and start building places where value is measured. You should care because silence isn't weakness. It's leverage, if you're patient enough to use it. I used to think revenge meant making someone feel the pain they caused you. Now I understand it's quieter than that. It's building a life so structured, so self-assured, that their opinion no longer factors into your decisions. Seeing her in that hospital corridor didn't reopen wounds. It confirmed healing. 6 years earlier, I walked out with nothing but a suitcase and a bruised ego. I thought I was losing a relationship. In reality, I was reclaiming direction. I don't hate her. Hate requires attachment. What I feel now is distance, clean and undramatic. She was a chapter written in red ink, necessary, corrective. The firm continues to grow. We're expanding into 2 more cities next year. I mentor younger analysts now, especially the quiet ones, the underestimated ones. I tell them that restraint is not passivity. It's discipline. Sometimes they ask if I regret leaving the way I did. I don't. At 4 a.m. she said I didn't control her. She was right. I learned the only person worth mastering is yourself. And once you do, you never have to raise your voice again.